Do you believe that suffering is necessary in order for humans to evolve? Well, if you have embraced this very popular belief, you might have actually stumbled across the biggest obstacle to your ascension. Hi, I'm Saratoga Ocean. Welcome to my channel where I give you the knowledge you need to spiritually awaken and ascend with confidence and clarity. Okay, you guys, I'm about to get controversial in a very positive way. Let's talk about this ancient belief that suffering is the only way that humans are motivated to evolve. I'm going to show you how buying into this false belief will cause you to checkmate your own evolution and short-circuit your ability to ascend. See, there is something in this universe known as the source of fear. It is also the source of all suffering. This something exists as a deformed and false law of physics that was created when an unfortunate experiment was tried in this universe. This experiment produced an entire universe of false physics that gave rise to everything we know here on Earth as pain, death, fear, and suffering. Now, what we call ascension is an evolutionary process where the universe itself is attempting to heal from this disaster and restore itself back into its original state of oneness. So our ascension here on Earth is a smaller part of a much, much larger universal process. Now, there's something you should know about the source of fear. It has only one mode of existence: preserving the survival of itself. It's a self-perpetuating law of false physics that feeds itself with its own illusions in order to maintain its existence. Now, everything in this universe is affected by the results of this experiment. That includes all density levels and dimensions of existence here. It doesn't matter what density you go to, you will still be operating within the influences of this experiment. You will just experience it differently depending upon which level you are in. So when you hear things from 6th or 7th density beings, for example, who still maintain that suffering is necessary in order for humans to evolve, you are seeing the fact that they too are still under the influence of the source of fear. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that they themselves are fearful, but they are still under the influence of the results of this experiment. So let's talk about this belief that humans need to suffer in order to evolve. It has been said by so-called higher ups that humans are basically lazy and unmotivated. They claim that suffering had to be created in order to motivate humans to evolve. Well, that's like saying that human beings are nothing more than lazy, dumb animals. I mean, they would certainly not be creators if this were true. Fortunately, it's not true. It's just another excuse for the existence of suffering. See, there is never, ever a shortage of excuses for why suffering exists. And that's what is so important to understand. These beliefs are all excuses that are meant to justify the existence of pain. Now, I always say that the most important thing is to follow the wisdom of your own heart. So let's take a moment to see what the heart has to say about suffering. Ask your heart if it is totally fine with suffering, because there are so many good excuses for its existence. Now, if you find it difficult to get a clear answer from your heart, then we can assist that process by looking at some clear examples of suffering in this world. bring to mind an idea that you feel would be the worst form of suffering imaginable. For example, many people are very concerned about a certain type of trafficking of a certain age of people. Now, I don't know if I can be specific on this platform, so you kind of have to read between the lines. Now, could you in your heart go to one of those victims and say, hey, no worries, this is good for you. This is happening so that you will be motivated to evolve. Is that what your heart would say? I seriously doubt your heart would say that. I kind of think that your very first heartfelt impulse would be to want to bring an end to that person's suffering. You would absolutely know that such suffering is wrong and should not exist. Now, I want to point out how the belief that suffering is necessary in order to evolve is the greatest checkmate ever invented. Here's how it works. Think for a moment, what is it that we are trying to evolve out of? Well, we're trying to evolve out of fear, pain, death, and suffering. We're trying to evolve out of all forms of trauma. But then at the same time, we go around deifying suffering. We deify fear. We say that these things are with us for a very good reason. We say that everything that happens for our highest good, as though we have no discerning powers whatsoever. Now, let me point something out to you guys. You cannot have it both ways. You cannot say that you are on an evolutionary path of true ascension, while at the same time you are deifying fear and suffering as a necessary part of your evolution. That's like saying, I want the darkness to go away, but I need the darkness to motivate me to want it to go away. See what a checkmate that is? You've just created a closed circle of logic that will keep you trapped in darkness forever. And that's the cosmic checkmate with this belief. Now, I also want to point out another interesting web of entanglement that we humans tend to get trapped in. It's the popular philosophy that says we chose this misery. It's the philosophy that says that God created suffering because the Creator wanted to experience everything, even the darkness. So therefore, all of this negative stuff is very important by design. Now, first of all, God cannot experience darkness because darkness is the absence of light, and God is light. So God cannot experience the absence of itself. I mean, that notion doesn't even hold up with simple science. Have you ever tried to experience the absence of yourself? It's just not possible. And likewise, the Creator cannot experience the absence of itself either. That's not an experience of anything. So that philosophy makes no sense whatsoever. But if you believe this, then you could find yourself caught in a cosmic web of illusion while living out some very strange, painful lifetimes for what could feel like an eternity. That's because you will have used this philosophy to validate and affirm your belief that pain and suffering are God's will. See, it's a major form of cognitive dissonance to say that suffering is God's will and then ask God to end your suffering. See, that's like going against the will of God. And then you end up kind of trapped because on another level, you don't really ever want to do anything that goes against the will of the Creator, in which case you can spend an untold number of lifetimes throughout this universe struggling with fear, pain, and suffering because you made these experiences important at a higher level. Now, I'm going to recommend something very controversial, so it's up to you if you want to take it or leave it. Just do what feels right for you. I recommend that you stop trying to ascend through numbered densities and dimensions. Ask yourself if you even know what that means. Or are you just assuming that trying to ascend that way is a good idea because it's popular? Now, I have to tell you guys something. I was around when everyone was saying the same thing about 4D. Whatever you're hearing about 5D, they were saying about 4D. There was tremendous excitement about how the Earth was going to split into two versions of itself, and some would go to 4D while others would sadly be left behind. Well, it turned out that everyone got left behind, meaning that it never happened. So when I reflect back on that, I always find it interesting that right now we seem to want to skip over 4D and jump from 3D right into 5D. See, basically it's kind of like, well, 4D didn't really work out the last time around, so let's just skip over it this time. And of course, there are all sorts of logical explanations for this. Some people say, well, 4D is just kind of like a transition. It's sort of like a never mind kind of a thing. Now, I have to tell you guys, I will not be at all surprised if people start getting very frustrated about 5D and decide to skip over 5D and jump right into 6D, since 5D isn't exactly working out the way they said either. See, I told you this was going to be controversial. Anyway, I want to offer you guys something much better and much more direct. Are you willing to listen to your heart and tap into the wisdom that it holds, even if nothing on the outside agrees with that wisdom? See, the outside world is not exactly a paradise of beauty at this moment, and it is certainly not a reliable source of truth. But your heart is reliable. Your heart only knows the truth. Now, this belief that suffering, pain, and death are absolutely essential is deeply entrenched at multidimensional levels of our human experience. Let me share a fascinating story with you. One time a while back, I went to what was called a near-death experiencers meeting that was open to the public because I just wanted to find out what they had to say. It was a local chapter of an international organization for people that they call NDEers, meaning near-death experiencers. So in this meeting, I sat quietly and I listened as several people shared their near-death experiences. And the meeting was run by a main speaker and by someone else who also appeared to be his assistant. So when the formal part of the meeting was over, people basically just stood around and talked, and I just stood by quietly listening. I didn't say anything because I felt that I was a guest and that it would not really be appropriate for me to voice an opinion. I was really just trying to be very respectful. But then the guy who was the assistant to the main speaker just kept eyeing me. And finally he came over to me and he said, "So, what's your story?" So, because he asked, I said, "Well, I was just listening and I was kind of thinking, maybe death shouldn't even exist." Well, that was like a match to gasoline. The guy went completely ballistic. He went from being a peaceful, serene NDEer to being totally outraged that I would even suggest such a thing. We quickly got onto the subject of pain and suffering, and I said, "Well, I don't think that pain and suffering should exist either." Well, that sent him completely over the edge. He started cursing and verbally attacking me and saying things like, "We need pain and suffering. Pain and suffering are very important." He was absolutely furious. And then he looked right at me and he said, "Who do you think you are, God?" So for some reason, I answered, "Well, that depends on how you define God." I have no idea why I said that. However, that question just stopped him in his tracks. He had no answer, and so he just angrily walked away. Then he proceeded to stalk me from a distance, sending psychic daggers of anger at me the entire time. I think he believed that I was the most evil person he had ever met because I didn't think that people should ever have to suffer and die. So eventually I left and he literally followed me out of the building to make sure that I was really gone. I mean, I was so amazed that this seemingly peaceful, very spiritual person could switch into such feelings of rage because I didn't share his belief that pain, suffering, and death are very important and needed. See, here's the thing that you need to understand. My perspective comes from a place completely outside of this universe. Things are very, very, very different in a cosmos where there is no source of fear. So when I talk about ascension, I am talking about something well beyond just focusing on numbered dimensions and densities. I'm talking about focusing on the end game, which is a total restoration of this entire universe back into its original state of oneness. So my main purpose in making this video is to give you an opportunity to start fresh and get in touch with your heart's beautiful wisdom. See, your heart already knows what a fully restored universe looks like. Your heart knows what this universe is like in its natural state of oneness and what all of the possibilities are in that situation. Your conscious mind, on the other hand, knows none of this. Your conscious mind only knows what it hears about and takes in from outside sources in this very limited arena of our earth-based experience. And then it has to process all of that information and somehow interpret it in a way that makes sense to it and fits in with what it already knows. Now, the conscious mind usually decides what to believe based on some kind of underlying sense of fear. And now things are a lot more complicated because we all tend to rely on the vastness of the internet as the source of nearly all of our information. So when you mix in the uncertainty of massive and often conflicting information, you have a pretty toxic situation in which you can get completely overwhelmed. So if you feel any resonance with what I've been saying here, here is what you can do to relieve yourself of overwhelm and confusion. Give yourself a break from thinking that you need to incorporate and process a ton of outside information in order to gain clarity. Stop relying only on your conscious mind to inform you about everything. Instead, go to a quiet place within you and decide that you're going to listen, really, really listen to what your heart has to tell you. Now, this might not be very easy at first because fear may have caused you to break off that relationship with yourself. So it may take time to restore trust in your own inner being again. And here's something that's really important to recognize. Fear does not want you to connect with your heart. That is an absolute fact. Fear will always distract you and try to divert your awareness back to your conscious thinking mind for answers. And fear will give you all of the reasons why you can't trust your heart. It will tell you there's nothing there. Or it might even say, you know, the heart's answers are just bogus and ridiculous. See, fear has a way of weaving a web of false logic through the use of the conscious mind until you just get caught in it, just almost like an insect in a spider's web. The goal is to get you to give up on ever knowing anything that you can trust from your own heart. So you need to give yourself some time. Be kind to yourself and be very patient. And don't let fear sabotage you so you don't have to get all stressed out about 5D and ascension as it is described here on Earth. You could actually just give yourself a break. You could just take a break and just give yourself some peace. See, all of the answers are within you. It's really just a matter of giving yourself a chance to discover what they are. So here's a really simple example of how you can start that process. For example, if you just take the topic that I brought up here, and if your heart says to you, I do not believe that suffering, fear, and death should exist. If that's the message, if that's what your heart is broadcasting to you, why don't you just believe it? Right? Because imagine What a wonderful thing it would be if that was a true thing, that pain, suffering, and death should not exist. I mean, that should give you incredible hope, right? So if your heart is saying that to you, accept it, believe it, because that is the source of truth that you carry right within you. And that's just the very first step. From there, see where your heart leads you after that. What else does your heart have to say? But see, if you have acquired a whole lot of beliefs and excuses for pain, death, and suffering, and you're trying to process, say your heart's giving you a message that says, I don't think pain, suffering, and death should exist at all. It's completely wrong. It should not exist. But then you have this conflicting belief, but I read this and I heard that, and it's been ancient and this, that, and the other thing. You could end up just diffusing the heart's message, questioning it, doubting yourself, and then just the whole thing just goes away. So really, I'm talking about an opportunity to get to know yourself. Get to know who you really are, because who you really are is incredibly amazing. Who you really are is more amazing than anything and everything you've ever heard or read about. I mean, sometimes it's like we're so close to that incredible infinite paradise that we all desire. We're so close, but we don't see it. We don't feel it. We don't know it, because all this stuff out here has us completely distracted, like all the time. It has us distracted fundamentally through fear related to survival. So I hope that what I've said here has given you some interesting food for thought at the very least. Yes, a lot of it's been controversial, but I guess that's what makes life interesting, right? So if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and share it out with anyone else who you think would enjoy this information. And be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because I am here every Sunday, Tuesday, and Friday with all new videos. And with that, I'm sending you so much love, light, and positive energy. And I so look forward to seeing you in the next video. Namaste.